everybody. My name is Stine Jensen. I work as a professor of public philosophy at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And it's my pleasure and honor to be your host and moderator for the rest of this evening. I believe some of you have been handed out a white blank sheet of paper with a pencil, and Donna invites you, encourages you to write down all your thoughts, anecdotes, and questions during her lecture, as you will be given the chance to ask your questions during the Q&A. But now, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome on the stage Donna Haraway.
Well, I have to say, I have long been of the view that the only people who should hear introductions like this are one's parents, because they earned it. And so, in a significant way, I'd like to honor my mother and my father and those who have come before, who make us all possible. And the title of the talk that I'm giving tonight is Staying with the Trouble for Still Possible Futures. Barely possible futures that still are to come and that are in our hands. And I do it, of course, with this amazing lemon on screen that grew in our front yard and is the fusion of several flowers into this monstrous, tentacular, science-fictional lemon that is having this conversation with time. In the form, of course, of an old-fashioned egg timer, a hen that also lives on our stove in Santa Cruz. It seems to me a perfect joining of entities for next nature. Now, it's not hard for any of us to think of the troubles that we are in particular, the hatred of migrants all over the world, not just in the Netherlands, not just in the United States, not just in Sudan, not just in Syria, not just in Israel, Palestine. The hatred of migrants, the hatred of peoples on the move, even as they are forced to move by conditions absolutely outside of their control, and the absolute necessity to stay with the trouble of these peoples on the move and to care for them and ourselves together to make home places. Also, the troubles of intensified climate disasters, the destruction of communities in the Pacific, of coastal communities in Alaska, of extreme flooding in Asia, extreme heat and fire across Europe. In the United States and elsewhere, the current fascist attacks on schools, universities, libraries, museums, laboratories, the attacks on science and its apparatuses for constituting knowledges, for building the strong objectivity that feminist science studies scholar Sandra Harding argued for many years ago. The capitulation of our institutions, university administrations, law firms, parliaments, and congresses to the authoritarians and the fascists, both inside of us and among us. They are not just those other people over there. I think the tendencies to fascism are deeply built into us who have been raised in the conditions in which we have all grown up. I think also of the removal of support in my country, the removal of supports for clean energy, the resurgence of fossil fuel exploitation, and intensified nuclear power pushes with, for example, the relaxation of current safety standards for weapons-grade plutonium to give it to companies for experimental power generation, if you can imagine such a thing. Attacks on food security and access to health care. National Guard and federal troops militarizing U.S. cities against migrants and building detention, really concentration camps for deportation. Unimaginable troubles of war, ecocide, and genocide in many places without serious response from states and international bodies or from we, the people. Now, clearly, staying with the trouble is in the mode of anger, hope, thoughtfulness, action, and creative imagination. All are vital if we are to survive these times. Now, I am particularly interested in technologies, as you know, and I'm interested in thinking and the technologies that thinking engages. That in a significant sense, thinking is not abstract. It is a technological process. And there are different apparatuses for thinking. And it matters which thoughts think thoughts, which technologies build which technologies. And I suggest to you, to us, two thinking technologies that have been terribly important to me. The first is situated knowledges. Now, situated knowledges does not mean perspective. It does not mean one's particular local point of view. Rather, situated technologies means strong, critical, historical, and contemporary excavations of the possibilities and the apparatuses for making what is. And situated knowledges are necessary at all scales and temporalities, from the intimate and particularly here, the particularly local or small in that sense, and globally, but always situated in the material semiotic conditions of being in this way rather than some other. Situated and not general in that sense. It does not mean identity or perspective. A very important point. Now, situated knowledges brings me also to the need for my second technology, which is SF, or string figuring. Now, SF for me has meant, SF first of all means string figures or cat's cradle, jeu de ficelle, juego de gatos, kurfiguren, or in Navajo, naatlo, in Indonesian, still another word. It is a global game with very particular kinds of formats, relations to cosmologies, relationships to seasons of the year, and practices of storytelling. But always, string figuring involves the taking up of threads in exchange with each other, the dropping of some threads, the breaking of patterns, the making of traditional patterns, or the inventing of new patterns. It is a kind of fabric art for weaving worlds. String figuring is the making of worlds in a kind of reciprocal induction, a kind of inducing in each other the patterning. You cannot do string figuring alone. Even if you do it on your own two hands, it is many selves engaged. It is always many digits, and some of them have to hold still in order for others of them to move. Passion and action, movement and stillness are all engaged in string figuring. SF, string figuring, for me also means the other SF words: science fiction, speculative fabulation, speculative feminism, science fact, and maybe most important of all, so far. The crucial capacity to not know, to be wrong, to let go, to experiment, to go visiting, to think beyond what is too certain, unknowing in order to connect otherwise. So far, not knowing. Now, string figures is, of course, a metaphor, but it's more than that. It's an actual practice. It's a serious proposal of a technology for thinking, does not work by triads, does not work by hierarchical ordering, does not work by binaries, is not really the same thing as distributed order, the way anthills work, for example. Distributed orders are very popular these days. Ants did it first, I assure you. String figuring is something else, and I propose it in the most serious way as an actual philosophical technology for thinking. SF works by attunement and addition, not by subtraction. It works with discernment embodied in the patterns that are made collectively. It works in ways that Vincent Desprez taught me, as I said before, through attunement. SF is also relentlessly feminist, drawing on all the genres and genders that feminism has liberated from fixed category. String figuring is a fiber art for making more livable worlds. Now, I would like to actually tell a small story, since I think that storytelling is really a crucial part of SF, or speculative fabulation, or not knowing, or making and dropping patterns in order to make others. And I draw from Karen Russell's new book, Antidote, an antidote against poison, the kind of thing you take if you have been poisoned in order to clear the poisons from your system. The title of the book, Antidote. Now, we must refuse erasure, engaging vibrant storytelling and historical truth-telling projects of all kinds. In other words, we must make speculative fiction for nurturing storytelling for earthly survival. Now, in Russell's book, a young woman, outcast witch, in 1930s Kansas during the Dust Bowl, in which literally the land is blown away in strong storms. The land that has been plowed by previous generations of white settlers who stole the land from their indigenous people and plowed it literally to death, so that it literally blew away in the strong winds of the great black dust storms that drove the people from the land into, of course, California. But that's another story. The witch caught in the dust storms, despised in the community, is used almost in a kind of mental rape as the repository of memory of those who have committed unspeakable acts of dispossession, of genocide, of rape, of extortion, of exploitation. People who cannot live with their memories pour them into the witch. But the job of the witch, finally, at the end of it, through the story, through the accumulation of allies, through the accumulation of the odd kin of an odd family that is not fundamentally biologically composed, though some members of this family are biologically related, the witch, through a kind of string figural concatenation of an odd kin family, must find a way to re-implant these memories so as to allow the possibility of moving forward into still possible futures. She must also not only re-implant the discarded memories, but also the memories that are precious but repressed, of pleasures, of multi-species flourishing, of vitality, in order to allow another prairie world to grow on the ruined and blown away ground. And in the wake of the whirlwind, she succeeds. Now, I'm going to take you on a very brief excursion through some of my work in order to end with a small plea for still possible futures. And first, I want to take you through three phases of what I like to call my ontological commitments, my sense of what the world, of how the world is, of what is, my sense of being. And I start with my commitment with a book that I wrote, I think it was finished initially about 1970, 72, and published in 76. It is Crystals, Fabrics, and Fields, or Metaphors that Shape Organisms, or that Shape Embryos. And it grew out of my PhD biology in a molecular and developmental biology laboratory, where I found myself extremely unhappy with the takeover of whole organism biologies by molecular biology, a particular kind of reductionism to DNA, RNA, protein. The story of DNA generates RNA, generates proteins, the kind of central dogma of molecular biology, since radically revised, but being constructed at that time, and the reduction of organisms to a kind of molecular master plan. And in those years, I was strongly against both mechanism, the reduction of the whole to its parts in that form, and vitalism, the addition of some external vital force, be it Mother Earth or God or anything else, against that kind of vitalism, and was then compelled by the many biologies that embraced a kind of sense of complex, emergent, that embraced a sense of emerging complexity, that embraced the unfurling of the world into many kinds of distinct, complex entities in relentless relation with each other. Call that organicism. In other words, I was drawn to the story-laden biologies, like embryology, ecology, evolution, the biologies that cannot do their work without also narrating a transformation through time, fundamentally narrative biologies. Then later, I met the work of Lynn Margulis and her theory of symbiogenesis, or literally coming into being through living with each other, or more to the point, fusing with each other. Because Margulis's work is particularly known for her theory of endosymbiosis, or symbiogenesis, embodied here in Shoshana Dubiner's painting in honor of Lynn Margulis called Endosymbiosis. Symbiogenesis, in Margulis's word, posits that fundamental organizational change in biology occurs through merger, and then subsequently natural selection. For example, the origin of the modern cell, with its nucleus and its various organelles, is the result of the fusion of an archaeal cell and a bacterium, in which they eat each other and get indigestion and are unable either to digest or expel each other. So a kind of active indigestion is the origin of the modern form of order we call the eukaryotic or nucleated cell. Margulis is fundamental to developing the theory of symbiogenesis, or the emergence of complex organizational change in the biological world through merger. Okay? That particular, and she was fundamentally indebted to the systems theories of the time, to second-order cybernetics, in part derived out of radical leftist biologists in Chile. Humberto Maturana and Francisco Varela were basic to Margulis's ability to think these thoughts. She was also indebted to a series of Russian biologists and biogeochemists. She had a kind of cosmopolitan approach to biology that allowed her to draw on the contemporary systems theories of the 1960s and 70s for a proposal in biology that was at the time quite revolutionary. Now, Scott Gilbert, who is a biologist friend of mine, I was his master's thesis advisor at Johns Hopkins while he was doing his PhD in molecular biology at Hopkins. And we began working together in the early 1970s and have never stopped. And Scott and I together have become committed to Sympoiesis as a general earth unfurling proposal of the relentless reciprocal induction of what is through our relationalities with each other. That Sympoiesis is a name for the fundamental processes that make worlds. And Scott has been particularly known for his development with colleagues, people like Michael Hadfield and others, of eco, evo, devo, iad, psycho, techno, and then put geo at the beginning, so you get geo, geological, eco, ecological, evo, evolutionary, devo, developmental, psycho, psychological, techno, technological. You can keep adding on, but this way of naming the sorts of allied sciences, the kinds of cross-field sciences, crucial to the storytelling unfurling of the earth as its own storyteller. Okay. I now want to take us to the book that was mentioned in the introduction, Primate Visions, and then to subsequent primatology, not Jane Goodall this time, although a contemporary of Jane Goodall, namely Alison Jolly. But let's begin in Africa with hunting with a gun and not hunting with a camera and not with a gun, but also with a gun, so that you can kill the creature you just filmed in order to stuff it and represent it in dioramas in the American Museum of Natural History. The scientific safaris of the early 20th century, and in particular Carl Akeley's work in the 1920s, and his collection of the giant of Karisimbi that can still be seen in the American Museum of Natural History in a diorama. Also present in this diorama is a female gorilla and a child gorilla in the embodiment in the museum of the heteronormal nuclear family as instantiated by the gorillas in the, quote, dark heart of Africa in the colonial 1920s, and the practice of taxidermy as this really kind of amazing craft and art for representing the story of nature as a heteronormal nuclear family as a place of education for the school children of New York City, for the immigrants of New York City, for the visitors to the museum. The museum has always been a pedagogical institution. It is like a book of nature. And I want to move from that to the stories that Alison Jolly told 40 years later. Beginning in the 1960s, she was a Yale graduate student, contemporary of mine actually, with the same graduate advisor as it turns out, although we didn't know each other at that time. And Alison meets in her PhD fieldwork in Madagascar, in the Malagasy Republic, the female-led, swaggering, opportunistic, ring-tailed lemurs in the spiny forest and dry gallery forest of the south of Madagascar. She was, from the beginning, taken with the complexities of Swidden agriculture, called locally tavi, and the history of colonial and post-colonial extraction and neglect, violent suppression, extreme threats to lemurs and humans alike, the contradictions involved in all of this, and her concern from the get-go with human mothers and children in the region, as well as with the lemurs and their families and children. She formed an alliance with a lemur biologist, a local lemur biologist named Hanta Rasaminamana, who had been educated in the Soviet educational system, because in the Cold War, the kids of Madagascar, the kids in the Malagasy Republic, were educated in the then Soviet Union. She had that kind of education. She and Alison became tight friends and remained so, continued to do their research work together for many years. And then in the early 2000s, did a joint project, which is illustrated on your right, the right-hand slide, which is a series of children's books. They were both impressed with the fact that the rural kids in Madagascar had no books about their own biology. They could learn about European rabbits, but they couldn't learn about Malagasy lemurs in their own biology classes, in the perfect fruit of colonial biology. So Alison and her friend Hanta decided that they would convince a publisher to publish a whole series of children's books, real-life stories of young lemurs of 6 different species, the young lemurs telling their own story of coming into living as a proper lemur of that species in that particular part of the environment, in that particular habitat. And they would do it in the Malagasy language. Therefore, you see on this chart the fact that in English, bounce, the white sifaka, is talking about its particular fear and curiosity from its forest world in Malagasy. These are beautifully illustrated and drawn books. They've been very popular. They are used as teaching tools, and it's the kind of pedagogical object that I see in stark contrast to the giant of Karasimbi in the halls of the American Museum of Natural History. So, at this point, I want to start talking, here we are, about the litter to which I think I belong. The litters of oddkin, the litters of familiars, those of us who make up a family. And I will begin with cyborgs. Now, mind you, cyborgs are sympoietic reciprocal inductions of organisms and machines, but not just any machines, digital machines, machines indebted to the digital revolutions of the Bell telephone era and subsequently, particularly of the practices of World War II and subsequently, and maybe especially to the practices of the electronic battlefield in the wars in Southeast Asia, the US war in Vietnam, that established the Pacific Zone as an electronic battlefield command center and invented the concept of command, control, communication, intelligence, C3I. I was a young teacher in Honolulu during this period, teaching biology to the unwashed of the world, that is to say, non-science majors, those people who would become fashion design majors and tourist industry management majors and historians, and definitely not scientists. So I was teaching the great unwashed in the period of the Vietnam War, where the electronic battlefield was being established and strengthened. And there's no possible way that I and my peers could teach the ways of God to man and teach capitalist science to the great unwashed as that area of life which would be free of the great pollutions of modernity, religion, and politics to be solved by science. Clearly, it was impossible to teach like that. And I would like to say that the creche, the birthplace of the cyborg was there for me, even though it came to fruition a little bit later. Now, mind you, C-cubed I has not disappeared. Look, for example, there at that magazine, a contemporary magazine, C-cubed I magazine, that is advertising in this issue a video game where you can play the Vietnam War, you can play the electronic battlefield as a, thankfully, not very popular video game in that magazine. Or you could look at the way drones for war, necessary though they may be, nonetheless, watch the devastation that war drones are wreaking in Ukraine and elsewhere. The way that the cyborg drones are swamping in all sorts of ways the more liberatory potential of drones, for example, for ecological restoration projects and many other things. And then look at the kind of technology necessary for AI, or more narrow, I don't know if it's broader or narrower, for chatbots. And look at what happens to the land when the data centers are built and the kind of energy demands. Look at the sterilization of the land. Look at the removal of life and death, of ongoingness, through the building of these massive energy plants that are necessary for the running of contemporary cyborg life. But also look at Lynn Randolph's amazing painting that was done in 1989, specifically in relationship to the student demonstrations in Tiananmen Square. This is a young woman who was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time, whose parents were demonstrating in Tiananmen Square. And Lynn titled this painting Cyborg. Watch the skeletonization of her fingers on the keyboard. Look at the cosmological scientific diagrams behind her. Look at the spirit tiger around her shoulders. And think for just a minute of all of the ways that contemporary cyborg worlds are vital and are our responsibility. Think, for example, of my student, my English student from Oaxaca, who is studying English with me as I study Spanish with her. Because of cyborg systems, because of internet systems, she is able to take a sophisticated course from Mexico City for teaching Spanish as a second language so that she can develop a career for herself that doesn't condemn her to a lifetime of injury-producing work in the hospitality industry, cleaning rooms for tourists. Okay? Think also of the ways that activists in the United States right now are collecting and saving websites and saving data from the fascists as the Trump regime takes down data and websites, for example, in relation to climate change and biodiversity and all sorts of other things. We have a bevy of skilled technological activists who are saving the data and saving the websites, who are archiving and maintaining the websites that are critical to the kinds of futures and presents that we need. Think also on such things as Signal Chat to maintain our own security and our own activism, relatively secret from the surveillance apparatuses that are deployed against us all. Think of the distributed energy systems that we all need, and then communication systems that are especially crucial for isolated people or for differently abled people. And remember that it is an ongoing struggle to hold on, to inhabit and to rework the worlds of cyborgs for earthly flourishing. Okay, so cyborgs are in my litter. Next in my litter is the whole category of companion species. Now, mind you, companion species in Latin comes from cum panis, with bread, commensals, at table together, eating each other for lunch, perhaps. Or it's not altogether clear who eats whom in various of the worlds that I care about. But basically, I insist, just as situated knowledge does not mean local, and it does not mean perspective. Companion species does not mean pets, which isn't to say that pets isn't an honorable job for the other entities who live with us, be they plant or animal. Animals who are pets have a difficult job, in no small part because members of our species are especially bad at learning what they care about as opposed to what we want. Learning how my dogs actually think about what they actually care about, what they like to do, what frightens them, is, frankly, a lifelong undertaking. And the mistakes that are made are both funny and shaming. The kinds of violence that we perpetrate on those who live closely with us as pets. So in no way do I want to dishonor the job of pets, but I want to insist that companion species does not mean pets, okay? That said, I'm going to talk about my pets. Okay. In particular, I'm going to talk about Cayenne, my agility companion of about a dozen years. She died about 10 years ago. And there we are studying together. I have a dog on positive clicker. I have a book on positive clicker training in my hand while Cayenne naps. Subsequent to her napping, I will try to put into action what I've learned in this book, and she will embarrass me mightily by having entirely different ideas about what I thought I had just said. So we are trying to learn to communicate in that early picture. And then in the subsequent picture, I would like to say we are something at the height of our achievements in the sport of agility. We trained for thousands of hours in agility in order to have what we call in the sport a good run, which is to say, somehow, God only knows how, you have somehow practiced the discipline, learned the game, subjected yourself to the discipline of the game sufficiently that you can run and release something new in the world, that it can flame into the open. It can flame into something that is more than functional, something you didn't and couldn't train, but also didn't and couldn't do without the training. Okay? So that the way the discipline enables the flaming run into what I call the open, not Heidegger's open, but the open of play and of invention and of letting happen in the world what was truly not in the world before. I would like to say that once in a great while, Cayenne and I had a good run. And there is nothing in the world like it, even an orgasm. Now, there's also nothing in the world like it when it breaks, when it tears apart, when you're flaming into a good run and there's a miscommunication and it all falls apart. And there you are looking like each other, like you idiot. You know, when I got in her way in an entry to the weave poles, when my shoulder was saying one thing, my feet were saying another, my mouth was saying a third, and Cayenne had a fourth idea, and we were toast on the course. We were ripped apart, and you felt the rip in the fiber of your being. It's that kind of playing the game with passion and intensity with each other. It's not an innocent sport. There's plenty there's failure, of course. There's also the kind of mistake in which you harm each other. More likely, the human harms the dog. But agility was one of the places where I learned what I meant by the open. Okay? And that experience of somehow flaming with each other into something that didn't exist on the planet before. Call it the joy of play. Okay? So the companion species are my litter mates. We are moving right along, honest to God. Okay? Now, also in my litter are the creatures of contemporary molecular biology. And I introduced them through Lynn Randolph's paintings. Remember, she did the cyborg painting that I showed before. She also did The Annunciation of the Second Coming and oncomouse. Both of these paintings are figurations, are depictions of the barely secularized Judeo-Christian, that is to say, Christian narratives that inform most of our politics, most of our philosophy, and most of our sciences. Perhaps that's slightly overstated, but not by much. Okay? The sense that our sciences somehow issue convey us into the future, bring the future into being, that our sciences are those almost transcendent practices for future creation, and in the mode of human exceptionalism, for resourcing all the world into the projects of man. Both of these paintings, the Annunciation of the Second Coming in relation to digital culture and oncomouse in relation to biomedical culture, we have there the first patented animal in the world. She is patented. It's not the process that was patented. It was the mouse, if you can believe that. She was a model for breast cancer research. And she is, of course, a suffering servant in the mode of Isaiah or in the mode of the Christ. She wears the crown of thorns. She's in a kind of Foucaultian observation chamber, surrounded by the peering eyes of many colors, the kind of global observation chamber of capital S science. Both of these are paintings that exhibit, I think, the outrage and the scandal of human exceptionalism, that all of the world is made is resource for the projects of humanity. Now, I don't think of myself as either a humanist or a post-humanist. I do think of myself as a post-human exceptionalist. In that sense, what I try to affirm is the living and non-living, multi-species living and non-living reciprocal induction that brings into being what is, what can be, what still can be, what might be, a kind of post-human exceptionalism that is relentlessly finite, committed to not knowing, to making mistakes, to falling apart, to tearing apart, and to staying with the trouble. A kind of post-human exceptionalism that we need, within which, frankly, the discourses and disciplines of humanism, like international law courts and the rest, are absolutely necessary ongoing apparatuses. So it's not anti-humanist. What it is anti-human exceptionalist. Okay? So that no technology is in and of itself forbidden, but the narrative frame, the frame of worlding in which we do these things is what matters. Now, where am I in this talk? Good question. Okay. I want to end with this slide. Well, let me first summarize all the beings in my litter for the purposes of this talk. Cyborgs, animals of all kinds, especially pets, and the molecular biological entities of the world that are really critical to flourishing. Think, for example, of the kinds of health apparatuses that we now feel should be available to everybody. Think for a minute about the fact that Scott's Eco Evo Devo could not have been formulated without the tools of advanced molecular biology. There is no way that we could answer the questions we have about how it is that the world comes into being, what kinds of interactions between the geological and hydrological worlds, for example, are occurring. There is no way that we can conduct modern science without up-to-the-minute digitalized scientific apparatuses and processes, including those of molecular biology. So it's the apparatus of human exceptionalism that I'm arguing defeats us, not the tools themselves. Okay? So in my final part of this talk, Storytelling for Earthly Survival, I want to re-emphasize what I hope has been clear all along, which is that the arts, sciences, and politics are inextricably interwoven and require each other. And a responsible adult person needs to engage all of them. Every individual person clearly doesn't need to do everything, but we are fools to wall ourselves off from the arts, sciences, and politics in our worlding practices. And I end with the image of butterflies and moths. And I start with this Mariposa, this wooden sculpture from the early 20th century. It's Mexican, it's unattributed, it's not known where it was made or who made it, but it is an embodiment of something that is important in Middle America, including Mexico, which is the joining of human beings and butterflies. And I remind you what you probably already know, that mariposa in Spanish, the word for butterfly, symbolizes transformation, rebirth, change, and hope across many cultures, often representing the soul or spiritual journey in various contexts. It can signify freedom, new beginnings, sisterhood, or siblinghood, and the resilience of, and it is used as a symbol for the resilience of migrants and human rights advocates. Butterflies are tremendously important in both local and global cultures. In Mexico, especially in the states of Michoacan and the area that leads toward Mexico City across Michoacan, the migrating butterflies from North America back and forth between Michoacan and North America, the migrating monarchs who return to Mexico into their nesting oyamel and oak trees in late fall and early winter, these, particularly around the time of El Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, these butterflies are considered to be, not to represent, but to be the souls of or the spirits or the anima of the returning ancestors who will visit with their family again on this day when the veil between the living and the dead is particularly thin. Okay? So the returning monarchs bear with them the ancestors who return and stay for a time and then leave again for a time, and return again for a time. It's the kind of back and forth that vivifies the possibility of community. Now, with the border war in the between the United States, well, the border war on the southern border that walls the border to migrants, including all kinds of insects, the way that creatures migrating through the air, creatures migrating on the land, creatures migrating across that area are interdicted by a border that was established in 1848 in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, when the United States defeated and conquered Spanish Mexico and took the northern territories of Greater Mexico for itself as the United States, including California. That's the border that is defended and walled in such a way as to prevent the migrations that my former student and colleague Joanne Barker, who is a Lenape, Delaware scholar, feminist scholar at San Francisco State University, in her series on the migrations of moths and butterflies and the walling off of the border. The two paintings of hers that I used for tonight are this one with the child holding the migrating butterfly almost as a kind of kite, and then the other one that has the larval monarch pupating in the arm of the woman and then going through its metamorphoses and flying as kind of spacefaring butterflies, the kind of metamorphic transformations that Joanne figures in terms of her imagery of freedom. And I end, before I end, okay. The future of monarch migrations is tied to alliances of scientific research, land struggles, controlling climate change, the struggle for polyspecific, that is non-monocrop agriculture, and healthy food plants and migration routes. It's tied to fighting organized criminal cartel violence, extracting land and resources crucial to the survival of the forests and their people and the agriculture of local people. Forced gang membership and desperate migrations of the young out of the region for jobs and safety. The monarch migration is engaged with all of these things in an intimate, corporeal way. And in the last painting, also by Joanne, from her Gaza series, I offer a last fraught story of still possible resurgence in the wastelands we make through war, genocide, injustice, ecocide. I end with Barker's Gaza, with her painting of the rubble left by Israeli bombing and of emerging flowers, moths, and butterflies in the colors of the Palestinian flag. These particular species of poppies, anemones, iris, moths, and butterflies are core to belonging to the land in Gaza. They are significant cultural symbols of resilience and connection to the land. Their vulnerable new growth and emergence in flight over the rubble symbolize what might still be possible on this land for all of its inhabitants, Palestinians, Jews, humans, and more than humans, from the river to the sea. Moths and butterflies have many stages of transformation in their metamorphoses. Can this be a potent symbol for the needed stages of metamorphosis still possible on this land for peace and justice? I remember that the butterfly is a symbol of freedom for many peoples, and I remember the abundant species of moths and butterflies over the whole land of Palestine and Israel. In her painting, Joanne did not explicitly include both Israelis and Palestinians in a new emergence from the rubble, but I do explicitly mean that in my use of her painting. Many in this brutalizing conflict will be unhappy about that. So I end with a desperate question. How can the human inhabitants of this land, in all their tortured histories, emerge from migration, settlement, dispossession, occupation, genocide, and ecocide in recognition of the necessity to live together somehow? What kinds of alliances might still be possible for staying with the trouble for barely possible futures? Can a commitment to post-human exceptionalism be part of the needed metamorphoses, providing the antidote that releases oddkin for earthly survival? Thank you.